Hello there, friends. I'm back after a long absence of a few days. And you may note I'm wearing a cap. It's a corduroy cap, blue in color. And why am I doing that? Well, because my head feels naked without it because I cut my hair really short, almost like shaving my head. You might have noticed that in my previous video. I'm not sure that was a great idea, but it was a kind of reset, and people like to do resets every now and then. Let me adjust my camera. Okay, now I'm more in the center of the screen, which looks better, in my opinion. So I'm going to try something new here in this particular case. And what I'm doing is relating a YouTube video to my Substack. So I'll place a link. Maybe it's this way. I don't know. Anyway, in the description to the Substack article that I'm going to be appending to here. And this is a new strategy where I'm linking up my YouTube channel and my Substack, and I'll point from one to the other in the future. In this case, I'm just pointing you back to that Substack article, which was about Viktor Grebbenikov, who was a Russian scientist who discovered what he referred to as a cavity structural effect. And it's also been described as bio-antigravity. If you hear something gurgling in the background, I'm making coffee. Okay, I don't plan necessarily my video making sessions as well as I might. So shoot me if you must. But anyway, I'm hoping the microphone will eliminate all or most of the background gurgling. And I'm not going to get up and grab the coffee whilst I'm talking. That can wait until I'm done. All right, let's see. Back to Viktor Grebbenikov. Um, there were a few things, a few comments I made on the video I watched. You'll find the link to that video in the Substack. It's on YouTube. It's by another channel. And this isn't the first time that I had encountered information about Grebbenikov, but previously I had read textual information and had not seen a video. Now, in the particular video in question, there are embedded some clips that one would imagine were made by Grebbenikov or somebody that uh, he knew, perhaps a friend and colleague or supporter. And at the time, Grebbenikov was living in Novosibirsk, Siberia, back in the 1980s, evidently. And so his discovery of anti-gravity relates, interestingly enough, to three-dimensional shapes. Three-dimensional shapes that produce an energetic effect. Now, this is not entirely a new concept. You might encounter, in terms of similar ideas, Dr. Ibrahim Karim's biogeometry concept, or you may be familiar with sacred geometry, which is a subject that, I mean, I don't know a lot about any of this, okay? I will perfectly openly admit, but it's an area of study that I hope to pursue um, in my remaining long decades of life, you see. And of course, I say that optimistically. And if I were 20 years old, I'd be saying it almost as optimistically. because anything can happen at any time. But in any case, it's a subject of study that I hope to pursue. So what Grebbenikov discovered was that certain insects, like big, bulky, heavy flying insects like bumblebees and large beetles, which have relatively little stubby wings compared to their body weight and size, they were actually um, being aided by this anti-gravity effect that was based on very small, visible under a microscope, convolutions in, I think it was the underside of their chitin. Like, for example, you know how a beetle has coverings over its wings, and those open up. Well, actually, they open up. They don't flip up like that. They flip out and up a little bit. So think of the gull wing doors on certain cars, that sort of thing. And then the wings are underneath, and the wings, of course, direct them wherever they want to go when they're flying. But they don't provide enough lift to get that heavy body off the ground. So how does that occur? Well, Grebenikov's discovery was accidental, but he had the scientific curiosity to follow up on it. And I don't think he ever fully understood what he was dealing with. This is a matter for, further research on the part of curious scientists. But he was able to build a flying machine based on this principle, which was simply a little platform that he stood on, and he had handlebars. And so he could lean and direct to the anti-gravity effect. And he said this very simple device would travel at up to 1,500 kilometers per hour. And bear in mind, he was not encapsulated in a sphere or a disk, like a flying saucer, or anything like that, although you could build something like that around the device. But what he found was that there was, in effect, a force field around him, and he could travel at these high rates of speed without being blown off the platform, without feeling a sense of inertia when he was accelerating and decelerating, and all those sorts of things. So this structural cavity effect, whatever it was, affected inertia, maybe mass to an extent, although he didn't feel a sense of being like floating off the platform. He and the platform were held together by mutual, well, as if he were just standing on the ground. So there was a certain gravitational force in operation, but it allowed the platform and he himself to float up off the ground and fly in whatever direction he wanted. So that was the story. Now, there are people out there who want to debunk him, and basically they're calling him a liar. Maybe that's the case, but that's not my default assumption. Why not? Should I be more skeptical? Well, some people would say yes. That's okay. They're entitled to their opinion. To me, I'm not practically invested, nor am I inviting you to be practically invested in whether it's true or not. If you want to follow in his footsteps and create a flying machine of your own, like he did, go for it. So you could thereby, you know, by experimentation, you could verify his results or say that there was no verification, that you came up with an empty result and you don't see any evidence for his claims, and that would be fine. But while suspending final judgment and not being dogmatic that he knew what he was talking about and he actually did the things that he claimed. It's a fascinating story, and it's a rather beautiful story. And he was evidently a person with a rather delightful worldview, or not so much in mental terms, but in the terms of his heart. He was a lover of nature, for example, and he had a deep love for the landscape around Novosibirsk, which is it's called a steppe, steppe, right? So, sort of like Great Plains in the United States or something like that. But in any case, the 2 points that I commented on in the Substack were first and foremost, hmm, the suppression of his ideas that proceeded from the scientific community in the Soviet Union. And um, he would have faced pretty much the same thing in the United States or anywhere else. Now, was speculated in the video that, anti-gravity research was being done by the state or by the deep state, perhaps, in Russia and Siberia, whatever, Soviet Union of the day. And they didn't want competition, and they also didn't want people thinking too much about the subject. Well, that certainly is possible, but there's also a kind of endemic resistance in the scientific community to people investigating things that are considered, quote, impossible, unquote, according to the, quote, scientific facts, unquote, of the consensus, which is, to my mind, utterly deplorable. Okay. But that's how things work. It kind of, it's not entirely correlated with Carl Sagan's observation that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, because there should be an openness when somebody makes an extraordinary claim and they say, "Oh, I also have extraordinary evidence." Well, you don't, I mean, if you're a good scientist, you don't just say, "Well, your extraordinary evidence has to be fabricated and your claim is so obviously nonsense that there's no point in our looking at your evidence." That's happened a lot. In fact, with the founder of German New Medicine, or I don't know how to pronounce the German term, but Heilkunde, which is anyway. It's a theory that stands in opposition to germ theory and also somewhat to terrain theory regarding the causes of disease, right? And it was well proven, actually, by its founder. And he presented his case to the foremost medical university in Germany. And the response he got was, "If it's true, we don't want to know." And why is that? Well, because it kneecapped allopathic medical theory and the pharmaceutical industry by its very nature. So no, they didn't want to know about it. They didn't want to know if it was true. And you get that, and this is not about the pursuit of knowledge, and it's not about, trying to help humanity. It's about trying to make sure that this very small group of very wealthy, powerful, influential people maintain their hegemony. Well, the paradigm on this planet is changing, you know. I hope you know. Or that is the proposition underlying this channel and everything I'm trying to do in terms of evangelism, if you will, is oriented towards, a new day is dawning for humanity. And the people who think like that, like what I was just talking about, their power is on the wane and their hegemony is going to be, it's going to crumble. It's crumbling. It's crumbling. The power of the deep state is being undermined. The power of the financial elite, um, who were trying to stage a complete and total takeover with abject enslavement of humanity for the foreseeable future as their objective. They failed, and they will continue to fail, and they will be exposed. And I'm not for punishment. I'm not necessarily for amnesty either. So you have options, punishment or vengeance, and those would look pretty much the same, or amnesty. Well, I'm not sure that's appropriate. I don't feel qualified to decide those things. But I'm angry at those people because of the great crimes against humanity that they've committed and are continuing to commit, and they will fight to the very end, but they will lose. So, without going further into that, um, I made some comments about also second subject, the Anunnaki spacecraft as depicted in ancient art, where it looks like a bird. They have wings with feathers, or what appear to be feathers. They could be scales as well, and usually a tail. And these are very broad wings. Well, you had a picture in the thumbnail for the subject video here of a scarab beetle with these very broad wings. And what do they mean? You know, now they have a symbolic meaning, clearly. It means this thing flies and it flies very well as if it had huge wings. But of course, we know a scarab beetle doesn't have wings of that type. And maybe the Anunnaki ships didn't have wings of that type, but or that looked exactly like that. But my speculation was along the lines that they had something extending out from the craft, and that these extensions or wings might have contained this type of structure, like a honeycomb structure or a flower of life type structure. I mean, it looks similar to that. Um, that would produce this cavity structural effect. Now, I don't think that the Anunnaki vehicles necessarily depend entirely on that effect. They could have other types of anti-gravity mechanisms, which do exist, apparently. There's information. There was a craft called the Flux Liner that was rumored to exist, and there were explanations about how it produced anti-gravity, which were pretty realistic, by the way, or at least correlate very closely with explanations by Elena Danaan of how Galactic Federation of Worlds craft operate, and even say Bob Lazar and others. I mean, there are various different accounts of how anti-gravity effects are generated for alien reproduction vehicles or for craft used by advanced civilizations like the Galactic Federation. So, so that's probably also used by the Anunnaki, but consider, and this was a major point that I made, that insectoid species might already have this anti-gravity ability. And you can turn it on and off, presumably by how you deploy these, chitinous extensions of your body if you're an insect or an insectoid. So, intelligent insectoid species, and they're supposedly very old, or many of them are, might have had a very easy and obvious path from their own biology or based on their own biology to designing aircraft and then, in short order, spacecraft. And so, with that thought in mind, the Anunnaki might have adopted their technology and combined it with other anti-gravity technologies. So I want to find particularly the video where Elena is referring to one of her books, and she talks about and shows diagrams of how the anti-gravity drives of Galactic Federation craft work. There's also an episode of the Y-Files, which I stumbled upon, where it's called, how to build a working alien reproduction vehicle or similar title. So yeah, so I mean, I've to an extent repeated what I said in the Substack article, but I also expanded on it a little bit and gave further explanation and clarification. So I hope that that was useful to anyone watching this. And if you have any thoughts about it, feel free to comment on the Substack if that's appropriate, or below this video if that seems more appropriate based on what I've said here. And if you liked this video, give me a thumbs up. And if you didn't like it, you can do that too, but I hope you won't. Some things it's better to keep to yourself because I don't want harm to come to my beloved channel. I just want its reach to expand because it has the potential to help people. And how so and why so? Well, I've covered that extensively in earlier videos, but basically our world is changing. It's going to change rapidly and radically in the years immediately ahead of us. So the sooner we, or an individual, does a deep dive into this kind of material, I think the better off we'll be because a lot of people will be seriously destabilized mentally and emotionally by what's coming. And I want to no, I want to help as many others save themselves from that eventuality as I can by providing information, stimulating thought, stimulating interest. So those are my objectives. And of course, this is only going to work with the more open-minded folks. That's okay. Um, I'm just here to do what I can. Okay. So with those thoughts in mind, I can't really think of anything else that seems overly important to say. Oh, well, maybe one thing. Okay. In the Substack article, I laid it on a little bit heavy about the Trump team and the good that they're doing. And I know that people will come to this information from a variety of political perspectives. I don't necessarily expect, although it could happen, any people on the extreme left to be attracted to this material. If you are, we're friendly around here. We're not against anyone's interests, at least not their authentic interests. And, unfortunately, on the left, you get a lot of propaganda that's trying to tell you what your interests are, and it's actually completely opposite to what your interests really are, or anyone's interests if they're human and they're not part of the elite, and even the elite, so-called elite, they end up stuck oscillating back and forth between greed and fear because they're extremely corrupt. And that's not a place that's good for anybody in the long run. But all that is not to say that Trump and his team are perfect. It's not to say that they should be immune to criticism. But here's how I would prefer it. If they were doing something that I felt I needed to comment on, I would present it to them as a constructive suggestion. Here's why I don't like what you're doing or why I don't think it's ideal. And here's how I think it could be made more ideal. So that's very legitimate. And we all do well to be working together towards building a beautiful and brighter future. And I think we can do that not by opposing what people who actually love their country and the whole human species, which describes for me, it describes the entire Trump team, okay? Which is to say him and anybody that he has seen fit to appoint as an advisor or as an implementation supervisor, which is what the secretaries of various agencies are. This is, there's a lot more care that goes into what he does than may appear on the surface. And his opposers are, you know, Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing. And what it also is human freedom derangement syndrome. There are people who don't want that because it interferes with their agenda to be controllers and to funnel money and everything else up from the teeming masses of people who actually work for a living and are capable of doing something genuinely productive up to this, little small elite group. They accuse Trump of being on that side. He wants to give tax cuts to billionaires and all that sort of thing. But they're projecting their own um, how they think and what their agendas and motivations are, and trying to get people to believe it. But fortunately, it's not working very well. Most people see through this as propaganda, and they really can see it as false. So so there you go. There's a little more explanation of that as well. For what it's worth, might be worthless to some, but I'm not here to please everybody, and I couldn't do that if I tried. But you're free to disagree, of course. So, all right, I'll let this go at this point and say hasta la vista, which I always do, or bye bye, and we will hopefully re-engage at another time. Come back and check out what's new, and if you don't like the political part, I won't do that every time. Excuse me, but I do try to relate whatever I have to say to the futurism with the proposed or foreseen um, and the consequences of humanity's consciously joining the cosmic community in mind. And I was talking to a friend, and I got one more little piece of what I'm doing, part of my personal brand. I'm a facilitator of integration of this knowledge, okay? Beneficial integration. So, that being said, I'm going to hit the stop button, and we'll see you later.